A stranger was living inside our walls. We heard strange sounds for months and blamed an old house. We had no idea someone was eating our food, using our things, and watching us through a hole in the wall from inside our own home. Of all the horror stories I have ever read, there is one fear that sits above everything else. Not the monster outside, not the darkness beyond the window, but the realization that someone has been living inside your home without you ever knowing. This is a true story. It happened to a 15-year-old in Alberta, Canada, and it is the most unsettling thing I have ever heard. The family needed more space. A new baby was coming, and just a few blocks away, a house was selling for a remarkably low price. It wasn't beautiful, the area wasn't ideal, but it had room to grow. They renovated what they could, turned the basement into livable space, and moved in with hope. The first sign came on the father's birthday. The whole family returned home from dinner to find the front door wide open. Police searched every room, nothing stolen, no intruder found. A few books had been moved on a shelf, knocked slightly out of position. Everyone assumed a careless break-in attempt and tried to move on. After that, the sounds began. Faint noises coming from inside the walls, sounds from beneath the basement, always quiet enough to explain away. Old pipes, they told themselves. Old houses make noise. One night, at 2 a.m, the teenager lay under her sheets, playing her Nintendo DS silently so her parents wouldn't know she was still awake. And then she heard it. Laughter, clear and unmistakable, coming directly from the wall beside her bed. She lay completely still for 30 minutes. When it didn't come again, she convinced herself it had been a dream. Then the night that changed everything arrived. Her parents had gone out for a late dinner, leaving her to watch over the house and her infant sister sleeping in the basement room they shared. She was upstairs watching a film when the baby monitor on the kitchen counter crackled to life. She could hear it clearly, heavy footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving through the basement. Her baby sister began to cry, and then, through the speaker, came a soft, unmistakable sound. Shh. She ran upstairs, grabbed her father's rifle from the bedroom. No ammunition, no key for the trigger lock, but she gripped it anyway and held her hand over the lock so it wouldn't show, and walked down the basement stairs. She announced herself, said she was armed, said to come out. No one appeared. But her sister was still crying, and the baby monitor was knocked sideways on the floor. She grabbed the baby and ran, locked the basement door with a chair wedged under the handle, called her parents, sat and shook until they arrived. Police searched the basement. No intruder, no sign of entry. They were preparing to leave when the father quietly asked them to check behind the bookcase, the one built into the wall beside the bed. The officers exchanged a look and followed him downstairs. The bookcase was pushed slightly open, like a door left ajar. Behind it was a hidden room, small, dark, wrapped in old pipes, and on the floor, food wrappers, a missing cup from their kitchen, a switchblade, lotion, a partially eaten apple, still fresh enough to tell them someone had been there very recently. While the police had been outside talking to the family, whoever lived in that room had slipped out through the basement window, which was open wide, with a desk chair planted beneath it as a step. The police believed the person had been there since before the family moved in. They said they likely wouldn't return now that the room had been discovered. They said to call if anything seemed suspicious, and they left. A few days later, the teenager went back. She pushed the bookcase open herself and searched every inch of that hidden room from floor to ceiling. And near the top of the wall, she found it, a small hole, no larger than an eye. She looked through it and saw, framed perfectly on the other side, her bed, her dresser, the exact place where she had slept and dressed and played and studied and spoken on the phone and lived her private life. She is an adult now. She lives in her own apartment with her partner. Her parents still live in that house, and every single night, in the back of her mind, there is one question she cannot silence. Was that room ever truly empty, or is it still waiting?
We thought we were welcoming a young couple into our quiet street. We had no idea we were opening a door to a criminal underworld that would shatter everything we believed about safety. 3 years ago, my partner and I found our dream home. Quiet street, kind neighbors, a life we had worked hard to build. We never imagined that the couple who moved in next door would drag us into something straight out of a nightmare. It started so normally. A young Polish couple purchased the house right beside ours. We exchanged pleasantries. They asked a few questions about the neighborhood, smiled at the right moments. Everything appeared perfectly ordinary. But looking back now, the warning signs were there from the very beginning. Late nights filled with sudden crashes and music so loud it rattled our walls. Odd hours, an uneasy feeling that settled deep in our stomachs and never quite left. We dismissed it. We wanted to be good neighbors. We wanted to believe the best in people. Then his car came home one evening completely destroyed, both sides scraped raw, as though it had been sandwiched between two walls at high speed. His explanation made no sense, but we nodded politely and let it go. The first truly terrifying night arrived when he called us in a panic. 2 men were outside his house, he said, turning his security cameras away from the door. We called the police immediately. 20 minutes later, officers arrived. The men were already gone. But as we stood outside watching, I noticed something strange. While his wife came racing down the street and ran straight to her front door, the husband walked calmly from 3 streets away, as if he didn't want the police to see exactly where he had been. It wasn't until we reviewed our doorbell footage that my blood truly ran cold. The footage showed 2 men standing outside before the break-in, speaking to each other in Polish, deciding calmly, as though choosing between items on a menu, which house to target next. Nothing was stolen. No arrests were made. When I told police it felt orchestrated, I never heard back. 1 week later, I was at a housewarming party across town when my partner's messages started coming in. First a text, then a call, and in his voice, pure terror. A car had just smashed through our front garden and straight into the neighbor's own front door. 2 men were loading it frantically, flat-screen televisions, professional speakers, high-end electronics, working fast and hard like they had done this before. The police arrived in 7 minutes this time. Officers intercepted the men mid-loading. When asked for identification, one of them looked the officer dead in the eye and claimed to be our neighbor, using his actual name, his actual details. But there was a problem. In 9 months of living beside us, our neighbor had never spoken a single word of Dutch. This man spoke it fluently, with a thick Polish accent. Caught in his own lie, he floored the accelerator. A violent chase tore through our quiet residential streets until police boxed them in and made the arrests. But movement was still coming from inside the house. A 3rd suspect was dragged out. Then, as a police officer sat with us to document the damage to our property, our doorbell rang. We turned around, and there he was, the actual neighbor, barely recognizable. His face was a swollen, bloody ruin, one eye swollen completely shut, his mouth torn, his arm hanging at a wrong angle, covered in what looked like defensive stab wounds. He looked broken in every sense of the word. He refused to file a report, refused to cooperate. The officer had no choice but to send him home. Later that night, he rang our bell again. Trembling, he confessed that he had been unfaithful to his wife, and he believed she had sent him to be killed. He begged to sleep at our house.
Terrified and wanting no part of whatever world he had dragged to our doorstep, we refused. My partner drove him to the hospital instead. We dropped him off at 10:30, told him we were staying elsewhere for the night. Then we went home, locked every door, and sat in the dark. At 1 in the morning, our dog began to growl, a low, specific sound he only makes when someone is standing at the door. We checked the camera feed. There he was, back from the hospital, ringing the bell over and over. We sat motionless in the dark, watching the screen. Then, headlights swept across the street. A car stopped. A woman stepped out. His wife. She walked toward the house, paused, and looked directly toward our driveway. She had seen him. He was crouching behind our cars, hiding in our shadows. She stepped into the glow of the street lamp, and she began to wail, a deep, guttural, haunting sound that echoed off every wall on that empty street. He didn't say a single word. She kept asking questions between sobs that grew louder and louder, and then finally, they both got into the car and drove away into the night. 3 days of silence followed. When the wife finally returned, she came alone. She retrieved the dog. She looked at us with hollow eyes and said she did not think she would ever see her husband again. Whatever the truth really was, drugs, debt, a marriage that turned lethal, I made peace with one thing. Some doors are better left unopened, and some neighbors bring an entire underworld with them when they move in.